Ke aku nui ki aku rahi, e ngā mārei kura, e ngā whatu kura, e ngā manu taupua, e ngā manu taikoa, koutou katoa kua topa mai nei, tēnā koutou, kei ngā rangatira, kei ngā mātanga, kei ngā pukenga nui, tēnā koutou. E ngā rangatira, nau mai, haere mai, ki tēnei hui nui whakaharahara, of Auckland's future now. E kohi ngā whakaaro, e kohi ngā pukenga, e kohi ngā tangata. Nei mātou, te haukainga, ko Ngāti Whātua rākei, ko takaparawhau ki runga, ko tāmaki ki raro, tumutumu whenua, o rākei tupuna, o rākei whakapapa, o rākei tangata. E mihi atu nei ki a koutou, e ngā mātau waka, e ngā iwi, kua tae mai nei, he mihi maioha, he mihi mahana ki a koutou katoa. E raurangatira mā, he nui ngā taumahatanga ki rungi a tātou i tēnei wā. Hoi anō, ko te tūmanako i tēnei rā, ka whai rongoa, ka whai rautaki, kia puta ai ngā huapai mō tāmaki makaurau, mō Aotearoa. E mohio ana tātou, he wero nui kei te haere. Hoi anō, ki aku rangatira, kia kahara, kia kaha tātou. Aha ko ngā piki, aha ko ngā heke, i ai ki ngā kōrero, he tīma o 5 miliona ngā tangata tātou. E te Premier o Aotearoa, e Jacinda, e te wahine toa, ka nui te mihi ki a koe mō tō kaha, ki te manaaki, ki te teaki, ngā tangata o Aotearoa. Kei te mihi. E te koromatua o tāmaki makaurau, e Goff, ka nui te mihi ki a koe, vai te kite atu ki a koe. E te kauhurangi Helen Clark, nau mai hoki mai, e te whaia, ka nui te mihi. Kia Nick Hill, Auckland Unlimited, also Pam, and all ngā kaimahi, nei rā te mihi atu ki a koutou. Ladies and gentlemen, kia ora. It's an honour to welcome you all here on behalf of Ngāti Whātua o Rākei today. I'd like to acknowledge all of the business leaders and social impact leaders and experts here today who have come together to collaborate and find solutions for a road to recovery to recreate a prosperous and successful tomorrow for our city and our country of Aotearoa. As an iwi of Ngāti Whātua, when COVID hit us last year, it forced us to come together, get our best people and our minds together, and it made us focus more on taking care of our people, of our tribal members. They became our number one priority. And through smart leadership and collaboration, mahi tahi, and thanks to our financial strength as an iwi, also thanks to the goodwill of some like-minded health organisations and government agencies, we were able to respond appropriately to the needs of our people. Whether it be through the delivery of 1,500 food parcels each week, the gifting of food vouchers to those families that needed them, grants for power bills, regular phone calls to check up, make sure Auntie was all right, they had everything that they needed, daily karakia online, te reo lessons, kapahaka, enabled us to engage and connect with our people. And they realised that their iwi really cared for them. Actually, our job to serve our people got easier because we could focus on a solution. There was less bureaucracy, less red tape, and the usual rules and distractions didn't apply. And things got done and approved a lot quicker and more efficiently. And, some of our people couldn't believe the things that we were able to offer them with. Another remarkable thing, we saw in the video earlier, that we appreciated and cherished was the improved state of our whenua, of Papatuanuku, Mother Earth. She was breathing again. More birds were chirping, the fish were jumping, our moana was clean and pristine. And so it was true bliss. If it was up to some of us kaitiaki, iwi kaitiaki of our whenua, we'd probably have a rāhui or a form of lockdown every year to allow Papa Tuanuku and our moana to heal, just like it did last year. Sure, we'd like to leave a few cafes, restaurants and pubs open. We need our latte every day and our wine on a Friday. But we need to consider those things most at need, our people and our taiao. You will all know the famous proverb, New Zealand proverb, ia ha te mea nui o te ao, māku e ki atu, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What is the most important thing? It is people, it is people. The other answer to that is he whenua, he whenua, he whenua. It is the whenua, the land. And so we ask that today that you think of the whenua, you think of our people, particularly those most at need. You know, he waka eke no tātou, and we want to work in unity. If you take tangata, you take whenua, what do you get? You get us. You get tangata whenua. And we want to be part of working with you all to come up with a solution. And we are here, Ngāti Whātua are here today. Our CEO from Whaimaia, Rangimaria Hunia, will be speaking later on. And we hope that you all enjoy that. So on behalf of Ngāti Whātua Rākei, it's a great honour to welcome you all here today. And ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa.
He aha te hau, he wawara mai, he tiu he rā ki nāna ia mai te pū, pūtariki ki uta e tiki nā tuea. Te kotu ko ia te pau whakaero kotu, ki wai te mata, i oku wairangi e.
Ko kiri. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Tēnā koutou katoa, no maira. Welcome everybody, and thank you very much, Clay, for honouring and blessing this event on behalf of the tangata whenua of Tāmaki Makaurau. My name is Melissa Chan Green. It's my pleasure to be with you here at the Chorus for the 2021 edition of Auckland's Future Now, which I'm sure will be an important and thought-provoking day. Many of you will have been here in August last year. It's crazy to think how much has happened since then for the first Auckland's Future Now. And that event recognised that Auckland is Auckland, New Zealand, not in competition with the rest of New Zealand, with close economic ties to our surrounding regions and our recovery essential to spurring the national recovery. The areas identified in the first Auckland's Future Now were in investment, workforce, border management, domestic promotion and public funding. And there has been progress in all of these areas, but there is still work to do. As Aucklanders, we've done better than expected in tackling the impacts of the pandemic. I think it seems like the entire city was at the 660 concert, perhaps, except for me. As a mother of a toddler, I'm in that zone where that's way past my bedtime. But I did hear it from my house, and I kind of think that the atmosphere with a 1-year-old at home is similar. There was a lot of overexcitement, some spilt bottles, a few tears, but ultimately we all had a great time. And it was a great example of the freedom that we have been able to enjoy and the sacrifices that we've made as COVID-19 has interrupted the world as we knew it. We have an outstanding lineup of speakers today. I'm truly really excited to hear them all talk, but it is not a talk fest. In fact, it's far from it. Today is more about what we will do to answer these questions and many more. And the people on the stage today are the ones with the microphones, but that doesn't mean that we don't want everyone to be a part of this discussion. So I urge you to participate, and you can do that through Slido. You'll see on your program the details of how to do that, and I'll run through that a wee bit more later on too. There'll also be a good old fashioned suggestion box for you to put your ideas in that have sparked during a session or the day, and that is out by the registration desk where you came through. All suggestions will be captured and form part of the post-event actions. Now, the all-important housekeeping, I'm sure you all have already, but if you could please scan into the Chorus on your COVID app. The bathrooms are located out the back doors and to the right of this room. If there's an emergency, please follow the instructions of the hotel staff who will guide you. We have a very busy morning. We're going to hear from Nick Hill, the Chief Executive of Auckland Unlimited, followed by Mayor Phil Goff to open Auckland's Future Now. The Prime Minister will then address us, followed by a Q&A session. So let's not wait any longer, we'll get into it. It's my pleasure to welcome Nick Hill, Chief Executive of Auckland's Economic and Cultural Agency, which has organised today's event to set the scene. Thank you very much. Let's welcome Nick Hill.
E nā mana, e nā reo, nā hau e whā o Aotearoa. Tāmaki he ringa waka, tāmaki he ringa tangata, tāmaki makaurau. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm honoured to welcome you all here this morning to the second Auckland Futures Now. I'd like to acknowledge all of those of you who have given up your valuable time to provide us with your insights as speakers or panellists today, and I look forward to what I'm sure is going to be some thought-provoking discussions. We feel particularly privileged that two of New Zealand's most respected, globally respected and influential women are joining us. Our current Prime Minister, Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern, and also Prime Minister, or former Prime Minister Helen Clark, whose mana and wisdom also helped to make last year's event the success that it was. Anne Sherry completes a formidable trio of women who will join us today. Sir John Key is also back again, and I will have the pleasure at the end of the day to do a Q&A with him. We have two outstanding speakers this morning in Sir Peter Gluckman and Greg Cross from Soul Machines, who are leading innovative thinkers. We ran the inaugural Auckland Futures Now in August last year. We only did so after much discussion with senior leaders in the business community who wanted the opportunity to talk about Auckland's future. With input and advice from a range of business leaders, we set out to stimulate discussion that was about Auckland. Auckland as part of New Zealand and not in competition with the rest of New Zealand. And that Auckland's success is good for New Zealand. And that Auckland has a number of unique attributes as a gateway and as emerging, genuinely emerging global city that we need to build on. We also wanted to stimulate discussion that was urgent. We were coming out of that first lockdown. We wanted to see action, and we were dealing with the immediate disruption of COVID, and we wanted to challenge policymakers. We wanted it to be fresh. That was to bring some new voices and perspectives to the table, and not necessarily concentrate on the sectors that have a lot of public platforms, such as infrastructure and housing, but some of the new emerging sectors. And we wanted to see a diverse, multicultural, young population represented in the discussions. And we wanted it to be optimistic, forward-looking and constructive, enthusiasm and excitement and energy about the future of this city and this region. It's within the control of Aucklanders that we can shape our future. It's not about whinging about who is not doing what they should be and having a go at the government. As we now all know, we are no longer realistically looking at life in a post-COVID world. Unfortunately, as we witness with the tragic events taking place in India and other countries, we know we must adapt to a world with COVID, and certainly that's for the foreseeable future. Some industries have been devastated and will never be the same again. Jobs which existed just over a year ago may never exist again. Investors, skilled workers, migrants have major barriers to movement around the world, and that's the reality we have to accept. But change presents opportunities that we need to take. We must think differently and work differently together as organisations, as industries, as a city and a region, as a country, and Clay just talked about that. We will talk about ways to do that today in discussions led by people with impressive credentials. For obvious reasons, 2020 was about crisis management, and most of us would agree our government did a great job of keeping New Zealand relatively unaffected by the ravages of the pandemic. But it is time to draw a line under the crisis phase and accept the ways we did things last year will not work for this year and into the future. If we don't, we will not be in a position to capture the opportunities the country needs to stay strong and thrive. The government's success has created exceptional interest in our country as a powerhouse, as a potential haven for international investors and entrepreneurs. And as the country's global city, Auckland must be at the forefront of efforts to attract those people. And my organisation will strongly support that. Auckland Inc. must collectively continue to ensure that the rest of the country understands that a strongly recovered Auckland economy is absolutely critical for New Zealand's economy. Auckland must be treated as a partner alongside the government. We remain the country's cultural and economic powerhouse. What is good for Auckland is good for the whole country. I know many of you here today are helping with that, and Auckland Unlimited will be a huge advocate for you and with you. I've had numerous opportunities to talk constructively with government ministers and senior officials in the past year, and I have been impressed with how open they are to innovative approaches to policy development and delivery, and open to engaging more creatively with Auckland. Policy created in isolation and simply won't work in the new world. It needs to be much more open and collaborative, and operational delivery needs to be in the hands of the people with the operational expertise. Auckland Unlimited is already partnering with several government agencies in important new programs in the skills, events, investment and tech spaces. Some of these we've successfully developed as pilots in Auckland and that the government is now rolling out nationally. This is a blueprint for the future. It is time for a new way of doing things. Auckland has the capacity, the talent and the determination to help design and deliver what our region needs and to deliver on the government's aspirations. We are here today to focus on what is good for Auckland while emphasising that what is good for Auckland is good for New Zealand, from Cape Reinga to the Bluff. And I'm excited about the opportunities and the challenges and the part that my organisation, Auckland Unlimited, can play alongside you. Auckland's future is definitely here now. So with that, it's my great pleasure to welcome Auckland's Mayor, Phil Goff, to the stage to open our proceedings.
Inga mana, inga reo, e rā rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ki na mana whenua, ngā te whātawa o ora kei, tēnā koutou. No mai, haere mai, good morning and welcome. And because today is Eid al-Fitr, Assalamu alaikum, Eid Mubarak, a very special day for our Muslim community. Can I acknowledge our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern? Great to have you here today, Jacinda. Our former Prime Ministers, Helen Clark and John Key, will be joining with us later. We have here a long list of people from our leaders from our business community, from academia, from mana whenua, from local and central government officials and elected representatives, our Deputy Mayor and councillors. A warm welcome to everybody here. We have the people in this room that can make today's proceedings a really valuable input into how we move forward in dealing with COVID. Can I give a big thanks to Nick Hill and Pam Ford and the Auckland Unlimited team for hosting us and organising today's proceedings. It was 9 months ago that we met in this same room, and I guess when we look back on that period, there is much that we can celebrate. At this point, 9 or 10 months ago, we were worried that unemployment might soar to 10 to 20%. It's less than 5%. We have managed to keep our ability to go about our lives and our work pretty much normal, apart from the fact that our borders have been closed. I want to thank you, Prime Minister, for your commitment and your leadership in moving so quickly and so effectively that leaves New Zealand in a much better position than most other countries in the world. I watched the news last night and my wife said, turn it off, everybody's grizzling. And I think maybe we should just pause for a moment and celebrate where we are, and not at the expense of other countries that have not been so fortunate, but when we see those horrific images of people dying outside hospitals from lack of oxygen, hospital systems overwhelmed in India, and at one stage it was Brazil, and before that the United States and Europe, let's be grateful for what we have been able to achieve. This, however, is not a time to relax and to be complacent. We only had to look across the Tasman to see what happened in Melbourne to know what can happen very quickly if that virus is able to take hold of our community and spread across the community. So let's think about, in this opening session, what are some of the challenges that we need to be discussing today? The first one is obviously how we can constantly improve our quarantine facilities to ensure that we can avoid that contagion through systemic or through human error. Let's think about the need to roll out our vaccinations as quickly and effectively as possible, because in the end, that will be the greatest protection that we have in our community to stop a pandemic taking hold here. Let's think about the challenges that we here in Auckland face as a city, because we're the gateway city. We've had 28 days longer at level 3 than the rest of the country. We've had 26 days longer at level 2 than the rest of the country, and we continue to face higher risks and higher costs because of us. Let's look at the challenge of the impact of COVID-19 falling heavily on some of our communities. I said before we only had 4.7% unemployment, but look at what's happening in our Maori and our Pacifica communities, where the rate of increase of unemployment has been much, much higher, and that is just aggravating the inequities that already existed. Let's look at the challenge that we face in working on the basis of the reputation we've earned as a successful country in preventing the spread of COVID. How can we maintain that success so that we can achieve the opportunities that opens up for us? But we have to move quickly because other countries are already moving quickly to open up to take advantage of their situations. Let's think about the skill shortages that we face because we can't have immigration. And maybe we should consider whether we've been rather lazy in the past of simply importing our skills rather than growing our skills here. That we've been rather lazy in the past about not looking at more capital investment and the use of technology to improve our productivity. We need to think how we can bring forward the recovery of international education. International education worth $5 to $6 billion to this country, and over half of that coming to us here in Auckland. At this time, in 2019, we had 60,000 international students in our city. Today, we have 20,000, and that number is declining. We have the opportunity to boost our attractiveness in marketing to high-value international students, but delays in opening up to students may see other countries benefit at our expense. I welcome the government's decision to open up places for 1,000 students to come back, but we need to think laterally about how we might increase the number by broadening the range of quarantine facilities. Tourism is a huge challenge. Maybe it will be that we never get back to the place that tourism once occupied as the major export earner of our country. But let's look at the opportunities that Auckland might be missing out on now. We have not done as well as the rest of the country in attracting domestic tourism to our city. In fact, it's been one of the poorer performers. Let's look at how we can take advantage of the 20% of our visitors that could come from Australia as they did in the past. Let's think about and discuss how we might move to broaden the bubble that we have with Australia to other countries that have COVID under control. Growing our film industry with the attraction of Auckland being a safe place for screen production is a huge opportunity. And I think of the Amazon production, Lord of the Rings, that's employing directly 1,200 people in West Auckland. adding tens of millions of dollars to our economy, and much beyond that, the services and the trades that employs. And let's think about how we can attract more film industry to this city. And it's a good time as well to think about our place in the high-tech industry. We have 60% of New Zealand's top 200 high-tech industries. What can we do now to build on that basis for one of the highest value-added industries that we want if this city is to be world-class? I want to finish by just looking at a couple of the challenges outside of COVID that the city faces. And if I was to ask you what the major problems were, the major obstacles were in making Auckland a place where talent wants to live, you'd probably agree with me that it was traffic congestion, although it was good this morning. I got here half an hour earlier than I expected, and the unaffordability and the unavailability of housing. And both government and council are working to tackle those issues. In our budget that we're working through now, our 10-year budget, despite losing $750 million worth of council revenue because of COVID, we are increasing our capital investment by 19% to $31.7 billion over the decade. And the government is working with us closely on transport, and we're looking forward to light rail. We're looking forward to a decent proportion of that $3.8 billion from the Housing Acceleration Fund, Prime Minister, which we can certainly use in this country. Half would be just fine, thank you very much. Our goal is to promote Auckland as a place of innovation, a centre of excellence for education. We need to build on the advantages of the beautiful environment that we projected to the world through the America's Cup 36 to the Northern Hemisphere. And we need to do that by ensuring the sustainability of that environment. We need to ensure that our culturally diverse city is both inclusive and an exciting and vibrant place to be. I look forward to hearing from you, your ideas, and benefiting from your participation in the discussions today. Thank you very much for joining with us, and it's now my pleasure to introduce and welcome our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. Thank you again, Prime Minister, for your leadership, for your commitment, and for your choice of making Auckland the place that's your home. Thank you very much.
Tuia ki te rangi, tuia ki te whenua, tuia ki te moana, tuia ki te here tangata, tuia ki a tātou o tamaki, here nā waka, tēnā koutou katoa. Can I begin by acknowledging ngā tangata whenua o tēnei rohi, Ngāti Whātua o Rākei, and for actually just bringing us back to why we were all here and what the most important anchors for our discussion today are, the whenua and our people. Can I also acknowledge all of you in the room, some of Auckland's best thinkers and strategists, people who know Tamaki Makaurau best and are committed to its success. Particularly like to acknowledge Nick Hill and Mark Franklin from Auckland Unlimited. Of course, Auckland Mayor Phil Goff, who traversed essentially many of the subjects I was going to touch on today, but I'll expand on a few in a little more detail. And also past Prime Ministers, some of which may not yet have entered the room, but perhaps in her absence, I do want to acknowledge the Right Honourable Helen Clark, who has been at the fore of a global discussion as co-chair of the independent panel on pandemic preparedness in trying to ensure that the global community is better prepared for the next time we face a global pandemic of the scale of COVID-19. And we can feel rightly proud to have a New Zealander at that table leading the charge on such an important topic. I'm also going to take liberties and just acknowledge Rob Fife, who I know is in the room, and we'll be leading a panel a little later on this morning. Rob has been just so critical for some of the work that we've been doing through the COVID immediate phase of the COVID response, but also through the work we're doing in ensuring that we're really working well together with the private sector on our immunisation rollout, but also on our re-engagement strategy with the world. So, Rob, thank you for the work that you do with us. Almost 1 year ago, as you were meeting together, as has been said, the world was in crisis mode. We were staring down the barrel of a global pandemic and all its repercussions. And of course, New Zealand was part of that as well. But today I want to acknowledge that while the outlook is more positive, things remain hugely challenging for many of Auckland's operators and businesses and feel far from back to normal for many, whatever we consider normal to now be. You only need to look at the number of times that Auckland is mentioned in the Unite Against COVID timeline of the virus in New Zealand to see the disproportionate impact that it's had on this region. And Mayor Phil Goff mentioned that. That has without doubt taken a toll on the city that accounts for 38% of the country's GDP. And not just economically, there is a natural anxiety that I think has formed as a result of that disproportionate impact COVID has had on Auckland. It creates a sense of uncertainty. It creates a hesitancy when we have businesses looking to the future to make investment decisions. And that all arises from your home and your business being affected by COVID on multiple occasions. And that's certainly been the case in Tamaki Makaurau. Now, as a government, we've worked really hard to try and provide as much support as possible, with $4.6 billion of wage subsidies helping nearly 900,000 Aucklanders. Our priority has been, of course, keeping people safe, but also keeping people in work. And the latest unemployment statistics bear this out as the right strategy, including in Auckland. But we're also mindful of the unseen and uncounted impacts. That's why this idea of certainty in such an uncertain environment and in such an uncertain world is something that we're so keen to try and create. Now, one way we can do that is by working hard to A, vaccinate our people, and I'll come back to that, but B, also reconnect our people to the world and the world to us. We'd normally see several million people enter New Zealand in a year. In the 12 months to March of this year, just 165,000 people came into the country. Now that's something that will gradually change. Whereas 2020 was defined by phase 1 of our COVID response, a keep it out phase, we're now entering phase 2, a time and possibility of re-engagement. It is a phase that's both hugely challenging, but also hugely exciting. A significant milestone in re-engagement was reached on April 19th when we launched quarantine-free travel with Australia, an amazing achievement made possible thanks to the efforts of the team of 5 million. Now, over the last week of the Trans-Tasman bubble being open, 18,000 people touched down at Auckland Airport, 16,400 more than the week before. And more than 70,000 people have now entered New Zealand since it started. The aspiration is to have Australian visitors contributing $1 billion to the economy this year, with that rising to $2.4 billion next year. As our main gateway to the world, Auckland will be, we hope, one of the key beneficiaries of this reconnection. Last week, we announced that a similar quarantine-free travel arrangement with the Cook Islands will come into effect on Monday. I expect Niue to be the next cab off the rank when they're ready. And these travel regimes, they are really world-leading. We're not aware of any countries allowing travel outside their borders in quite the same way, while still maintaining a COVID-19 elimination strategy. Now, over time, we will look to incrementally extend quarantine-free travel, if we're able, to other countries. What we'll be looking for is if they have similar approaches to New Zealand around COVID and whether or not it's safe to do so. But we're mindful that there is a very high bar for those quarantine-free travel arrangements. That's why we'll also continue to ask the question, is there a point at which we can start letting people into New Zealand based not on us having a bubble arrangement with their country, but because they've been vaccinated and they can prove it? That does remain a possibility, and something I spoke about in greater detail at a Business New Zealand speech yesterday. It will, however, be contingent on data, evidence, the view of experts, but we are keeping an open mind to the possibilities. We're also focusing on keeping our people safe and the freedoms that we have. But here comes my second big takeaway message for today. If the most significant thing we can do to help our recovery is reconnect to the world, the most significant factor affecting our ability to do that will ultimately be vaccine uptake. We have at our disposal one of the best vaccines in the world, and come July it will be available for free to everyone in New Zealand over the age of 16. But its full potential will only be fully realised if we achieve high uptake. Now, cautiously, I can say, so far, so good. In the last week alone, we've vaccinated 80,000 people. A third of all doses delivered have actually been delivered in the last fortnight, and the program continues to ramp up as we had planned. Aucklanders so far make up 36% of those who have been vaccinated. Later this month, all DHBs will be in a position to vaccinate all over 65s. And in July, that's when we begin opening up to the general population. At this point, it will be imperative that we keep up our momentum. Our research consistently tells us, though, that most New Zealanders, around 70%, are open to the vaccine and happy to receive it, but that others will continue to require encouragement. Please, support and encourage your whānau, your friends and colleagues to get immunised. Remind them that the vaccine is not only to protect them, it's to protect those around them and New Zealand's future. Because the more people vaccinated, the more options and the more possibilities that are open to us. And the possibilities are fantastic. Even with the limitations we currently face, we have incredible events coming to New Zealand over the next period. We're partnering with Auckland Unlimited and others on the 2022 Women's Rugby World Cup, the 2022 Women's Cricket World Cup, the 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup, the Ocean Race Stopover 2023, and the World Choir Games in 2024. I notice women's sport really leading the charge there. And we're not just bringing back events, but people. Auckland has keenly felt the sharp reduction in international students, for example. And we're pleased to announce on Monday that we'll be opening up a further 400 MIQ spaces to international students next month. We also announced 300 spaces freed up for specialised construction workers to help progress key infrastructure projects such as the City Rail Link. More generally, we're using COVID to actually stop and take a look at our wider immigration settings. As the Immigration Minister will outline in a speech on Monday, and I encourage all of you in the room to keep an ear to the ground on that, we want to shift the balance away from low-skilled, low-paid work towards attracting high-skilled migrants and addressing genuine skill shortages in order to improve productivity. Minister Whāwhoi will also outline some of what's happening around changes to attract targeted, high-value international investment into New Zealand, something many in this room have been calling for. Because even while our borders are restricted, we need to stay open for business growth and development. To conclude, looking to the future, I would still accept that there's a lot that's uncertain, with a significant amount of global disruption and COVID still the biggest threat facing New Zealand. But I would also describe our position as positive. New Zealand's COVID response is still held up internationally thanks to our team of 5 million. Our recovery is working and gaining momentum, and New Zealanders continue to essentially live normal lives. We have proven ourselves to be adaptable, to be resilient, which will serve us well as we move from a COVID response phase to an opportunity phase and reconnection. If you think of the last year as focusing on what we didn't want, i.e. the virus in New Zealand, the second half of 2021 will begin to be more about what we do want. As an epicentre of innovation, talent and creativity, Auckland will be central to this. I look forward to following up and seeing some of the outcome of your discussions today, and I trust that they will, of course, continue to feed into the work that we do together alongside you as government as we build our strategies of strengthening the recovery and ultimately reconnecting to the world. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. And as I have the very tricky assignment of covering the first flight to the Cook Islands, I want to thank you particularly for opening that bubble. And can you please join me in welcoming Fran O'Sullivan to the stage to hear more from the Prime Minister?
Great. Thank you, Prime Minister, for a relatively upbeat assessment of where we are. However, we did hear from Mayor Phil Goff earlier about the challenge around education, for instance. Is what you're proposing, which is actually a very small slice of what was a very vibrant market coming through our borders, just a few hundred people, moving to 1,000, is that enough? And what can we actually do to progress that in a faster fashion?
Yeah, well, I think what we're really trying to do is make sure that we are open to the different types of categories that we'll move through as we look at the risk presented by different countries. You'll see that we've already started putting in place some criteria to assess where certain parts of the world pose greater risk to New Zealand than others. And over time, what we're wanting to do is make sure that we integrate that risk assessment into our borders, use all of the innovation and tools available to us as part of our reconnection strategy. I mean, I think possibly previously there was a bit of a view that once you had a vaccination plan and everyone was vaccinated, that you would snip a ribbon on the border and then that would be that. What we're trying to do is actually say we don't necessarily have to wait for everyone to be vaccinated to start doing things a bit differently. However, our driving principles in our reopening will be the same: safety, freedoms, the things that actually have kept our economy ticking over and our people safe will still be the criteria we use. But let's look at whether or not there are certain countries that we can change up the way people travel from. Let's look at how that can then free up the capacity in MIQ. Let's look at the way we can use technology, and there's some really exciting things that could be integrated into our border to prevent additional risk. And how can that then change the way that we use quarantine? So there is a bit of uncertainty, but I just want people to hear from me that we are keeping an open mind as to what that will look like, and it will transition and it will change, and that will mean some differences for those.
I think part of the challenge from Mayor Goff was we're going to be in a competitive environment. We're not the only country which is now getting to a period of reasonably, well, we've hardly started on the vaccination curve, but it's going to be competitive. Lots of economies have been hammered in this period. And are you prepared to have another look, for instance, at private participation in MIQ facilities?
Yeah, well, I think that there will be the risk profile presented by certain parts of the world will actually be lower than others. And so that might change up the way that you use MIQ. I still think that there's a certain tipping point where if you have such a large offering of MIQ that actually the risk profile increases. We've seen what that challenges that presents. I think a lot of our energy should actually go into how can we use different tools and strategies at the border pre-departure to reduce down the need for you to use quarantine. So that's where we're putting quite a bit of energy. We haven't looked into necessarily a much larger expanded profile of quarantine because I think the world will start changing before you'd bring that on stream. The final thing I'd say, you mentioned the rest of the world will be in competition with them. Look, no doubt. However, let's not overestimate the fact that somehow countries who are vaccinating will suddenly, everything will be back to normal. It simply won't. And let's not assume that this is the only time that we will deal with a health threat like COVID-19. And I think investors in particular will be canvassing around the world saying, if this happens again, where will I be best placed to continue to operate my business or operate my services in the future? New Zealand has a rich offering in that regard. Now, on Monday, you will hear Minister Whāwhoi talk about how we can utilise the opportunity, this moment in time we have.
I'm going to ask you just for a little bit of foreshadowing on that one. And I'll tell you why, because that was the predominant issue and thoughts coming out of last year's forum, was the need to create an environment where we can get investment across the border to create jobs. So can you give us a bit of an indication of just what that might look like?
Well, so one thing I'd give a nod to, we already have an innovations partnership that operates out of MB that's been really successful in bringing in companies who are wanting to develop their R&D, some of their innovation in an environment that they consider to be relatively open in a regulatory sense. Whether or not we can actually expand our use of that program, so I'll just give a little nod to that, but also a little nod to the fact that here, when we're talking about that investor strategy, which we'll expand on Monday, This is about being really targeted. We're not talking about thousands, and I don't think that's what's being asked for. We're talking about honing in on those who will bring a rich offering to New Zealand in terms of business opportunity and are ready to invest and are ready to provide employment opportunity as a result. So how can we link in with that sooner rather than later? And that's what we'll talk about on Monday.
And you work with Auckland on that?
Absolutely, we already have. I mean, some of business leaders have been really key in helping us shape up what's needed there.
Now, we do have a couple of questions from the floor, and one which was about Ashley Bloomfield having indicated alert level 2.5 might be required to open borders wider. And could you comment on that?
Yeah, happy to, and that would be a helpful clarification. So, so Ashley and I have spoken directly. What he was drawing on there was that transition as we move from the armour that is at the moment our border. Our border is our barricade because we don't have any individual armoury. Now, as we move away from using the border in that way to individual vaccination, there will be a period where, of course, we'll want to transition and make sure we're keeping people safe. He was simply referencing the fact that we need to think in that transition period over whether or not we need to lift our game on our general tools, you know, making sure everyone's scanning in, making sure our contact tracing's really tight. So he was referring to making sure that we lift our game on some of the base level. He wasn't suggesting we would have to impose a consistent state of restrictions. So he says probably it would be more of a 1.5 than a 2.5. So it was that transition he was speaking to.
Because even that will impact on a lot of the visitor
and
economy.
Certainly not his intent there.
Okay.
And he's very clear on that.
He's been clarified.
Yeah.
Okay. Look, we've probably got time for perhaps just another question or so here. And again, there's a question here which relates to video game companies and how Australia has actually announced incentives for investment.
Thank you, Stephen, for that question. I'm just going to assume it's come from you. No.
I think there's a few people asking that one. So what can New Zealand do to compete? Is there something we can do to incentivise the kind of investment we want, but also to retain investment? Because I think we will hear later today that the giant sucking sound of the Australian economy, as it gets going, will also provide competition for our best people.
A couple of things I'd just say there. I mean, you know, I think we tend to frame ourselves as somehow the recipient of whatever, or really of just being in receipt of whatever it is Australia chooses to do. I think we just need to turn on our heads our assumptions there. I mean, I had meetings this week. The bubble has really reinvigorated Trans-Tasman face-to-face meetings. I had a meeting this week with a group of Australian business leaders who just, apropos of nothing, just said to me, "It's better here." And I didn't elaborate on whether or not they meant just in terms of their experience being here and our freedoms. I didn't elaborate. But what I take from that is, let's not forget that actually unemployment relative to Australia here is low. We haven't had to deal with the significant impacts of that additional lockdown they had in Melbourne, which we all felt desperately for Victoria during that. We're not the poor cousins. On the issue of incentives for the video space and that industry, which is incredible when you actually take a bit of time to learn what is happening in New Zealand, we can be rightly proud. The differentiation I would make, and we have debated as ministers the extension here, the differentiation I would make though is internationally, it is well established that if you want to operate an energetic film industry that attracts international investment, you have incentives. If you don't, then you're just not operating in that world. It's a given. Not everyone likes it, but it is simply the way the international film industry works. Now, we've opted into that, so we have to maintain our incentives to maintain competitiveness. We've got an extra edge at the moment because actually we've been thriving all the way through, for the most part, COVID. The gaming industry doesn't have that precondition to compete in the same way, or hasn't done. Now, of course, it's dynamic. That may change. In parts of the world, it may be a bit different, but it isn't quite the same as what we've had in the screen sector. Now, as those worlds blur, I expect that will blur. And let's keep up those discussions. But in the meantime, it is an industry I want us to try and remain at the front on.
I'm terribly sorry, but that's all we have time for. And the questions are piling up, but it's a very tight timetable this morning. I do thank you so much for being frank.
It's a shame on those last three I see on the screen. I could have done in 1 minute.
Could you?
Yeah.
Have we got time?
So
All
you've
right,
asked
okay.
about thoughts on
All right,
thoughts
okay.
on vaccine passports.
Right.
Open-minded.
Go.
The variants will be key, and also just the evidence that's emerging on transmissibility. But we are working in the international community alongside others on the notion of vaccine passports. The question on whether or not the CDC approves Pfizer vaccines for 12 to 16-year-olds, will we offer to that age group? We will put it through the same process we did the wider Pfizer approval. So if that evidence continues to emerge, the CDC approves, we'll put it to Pfizer. And I anticipate that it will be likely we'll see that extension, but it's their call. And I think those were the ones that just popped up as being easy answers.
Okay. We look forward to having you back next year.
That was very impressive. I saw there was a 1 minute countdown. You still had 10 seconds left.
Yeah.
Can we please join me in
Thank you
thanking the Prime Minister and Fran O'Sullivan? Thank you. Our next speaker is Professor Sir Peter Gluckman, who served as Chief Science Advisor to the Prime Minister from 2009 to 2018. He's hugely respected, obviously, globally for his innovative, evidence-based thinking, the chair of the International Network of Government Science Advice and president-elect of the International Science Council. He's also director of Koitu. Welcome, Sir Peter.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. New Zealand's not exactly well known for its long-term thinking. Our culture is dominated by reactive approaches and short-termism. And that's why Koitu, the Centre for Informed Futures, was established as a non-partisan transdisciplinary think tank focused on the long-term issues. Our role is to ask hard questions about our future and provoke the needed discussion. Auckland Unlimited has asked us to think about Auckland's future in strategic rather than tactical terms. But we must first acknowledge the very uncertain times we live in. I chair the International COVID Scenarios Project jointly between WHO, the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction, and the International Science Council. And we're looking at a decadal time for how the health, social, economic, political, and geostrategic outcomes of this pandemic will emerge. Clearly, the health outcomes alone have several years to proceed. Tamaki Mayoral has many translations, but it's always meant the place where people want to live. As New Zealand has opened up over the last 50 years, we've seen extraordinary internal and external migration to Auckland. And this is not going to be stopped or stop over the longer term. Auckland's population will continue to accumulate, albeit influenced by factors such as migration policy, housing, transport, the future of work, education, changing lifespans and fertility. Auckland will soon be home to more than 2 million people, and with a demographic mix totally different to the rest of New Zealand. In many ways, Auckland's character and potential is beyond the comprehension of those who do not call Auckland home. And this has significant policy implications. It's perhaps the first of several elephants in the room about Auckland's future. Auckland is the financial and mercantile centre. It's the primary connector to the rest of the world, home to 40% of the country's population, and with a diversity that can drive New Zealand's future. It has the largest population of Maori, Pacifica, and recent migrants. If we look out 20 years to the inevitable relative decline of our ruminant-based economy and big shifts in technology and society, this diversity will be critical to our economic future. There's too often a misconception of Auckland's value and impact on the rest of the New Zealand economy, which needs to shift if Auckland is to thrive for New Zealand's benefit. There's an inequity, for example, between taxation taken and that returned to the region. Auckland is too often perceived from other parts of New Zealand as a pile of problems, rather than its national asset to be nurtured. The super city, established about a decade ago, was largely about administrative reorganisation and was not well sold to Aucklanders, particularly to those living outside the old Auckland city boundaries. The city sometimes feels held together more by complaint than by ambition and civic pride. We must get beyond seeing Auckland as a city with a central hub of declining relevance to most Aucklanders and a spread of its dormitory suburbs with little cohesion or ambition, which is a very outdated model of a city, and the city's history of progressively encapsulating previously distinct communities could now provide the basis for developing precincts with clear identities across the region and have many secondary benefits, for example on transport and equity. West Auckland could be our Hollywood. Why do we not place tertiary education and communication and entertainment out there rather than in central Auckland? South Auckland is full of distinct social and creative innovation. How can that be leveraged and so forth? If we could truly embrace Auckland's diversity and confront the gross inequities in education, health and services across Auckland, we could get the synergies that the Mayor spoke of when he speaks about the place where Kiwis want to live. After all, they already do want to. They've demonstrated that by moving here. Now we need to give them the quality of life that we all want to have. Can we create a stronger climate of civic pride? The third critical issue I want to mention is discussed in our recent report on New Zealand's economic future. Economists globally highlight the role of cities as the primary units of productivities and hubs of innovation. But this has not been central to New Zealand's thinking. That failure has many implications which hold us back and will be of even greater disadvantage as we move forward. Cities exist because they are productive. London produces 23% of the UK's gross domestic product, yet contains only 13% of its population. The benefits to agglomeration include deeper and wider labour markets for employees and firms, greater specialisation in the supply of inputs to production, and knowledge spillovers through local networks. Firms in the same industry cluster because of these benefits, and in doing so they further enhance the city, increasing the incentives for firms from other industries to locate in the city and in its precincts, creating a self-reinforcing positive feedback loop that as Auckland becomes more than a service hub, reinforces the value chain that will in turn benefit the regions. By some measures, Auckland is more productive than other parts of New Zealand, but still has a low efficiency compared to other global cities. And this has led some to underestimate the importance of agglomeration. Regional development is desirable, but to compete in a technologically progressive world and to obtain advantage for New Zealand, an innovation strategy that deliberately fosters knowledge-intensive hubs needs urgent attention. Despite how COVID has changed work habits, the nature of innovation means that it significantly benefits from physical proximity and agglomeration. We have to be pragmatic. Auckland's geography means that some transport solutions and transport issues will be a major economic drag. And there are other issues, housing and social equity being others. But we must not drown out our long-term goals in a focus only on the immediate. We must reach out to be more collective and inclusive in defining Auckland's future. In a world where services and weightless products will dominate and material supply lines will shorten, including for food, and our traditional exports will be threatened over coming decades as new technologies are applied and consumers respond to climate change, Auckland and New Zealand will have to confront two realities. We cannot shift our location, and we're too small to do everything. Mariana Mazzucato and others have pointed out the mythology of a total hands-off approach to industrial policy. There are early signs of what could be achieved if we focused our approach. But Auckland itself has failed to make the most of its assets. In Auckland, there are 70,000 students in universities and perhaps 7,000 academics. I know of no city in which the dislocation between city, business and universities is as obvious as it is in Auckland. Silicon Valley exists because of Stanford. Waterloo, Canada exists because of Communitech. Tel Aviv builds off the Weizmann Institute. Geneva has rapidly created a private-public sector innovation corridor. But we have in New Zealand outdated tertiary sector policies with misaligned incentives which undermine their potential role, the lowest public investment in R&D of any small advanced economies, and other barriers to leveraging our inventiveness. In this context, it seems somewhat paradoxical that the one sector being allowed to wither in the face of COVID is the tertiary sector. At the same time, our commercial boards have a notable lack of skill diversity compared to most advanced economies. Accountants and lawyers have their role, but if boards are to be strategic, they need people skilled and trained at looking ahead and laterally. In many countries, the most successful companies have boards with academic members, even if they're not necessarily in the domain of the corporate focus. We need talent and have distinct skill needs that we do not have time to train up for. The window of opportunity for New Zealand to attract talent is evaporating rather rapidly as the developed world becomes vaccinated. Many Asian countries are now on an aggressive hunt for that talent. Our COVID-free status was an advantage, but it's rapidly disappearing. Start-up and scale-up are very different, and scale-up requires globally orientated expertises we're desperately short in. A further issue that's often ignored is our corporate mix. We need to be much more strategic in thinking about how we create a large R&D intensive company activity in Auckland. They're key to every vibrant ecosystem around the world. We have very few large companies, and most that we have are really branch offices of Australian companies. Can we change that? Could we leverage off those companies and create innovation systems that we need? Could those companies find niches that serve not just New Zealand, but beyond? Back to Australia, for example. Other small countries and innovative cities have done well in creating magnet conditions for R&D and related activities to be located within them. In the end, we're competing with Melbourne, Sydney, and Singapore for such activities. Auckland has an extraordinary asset in its diverse population, one of the most diverse in the world, and that diversity is yet to be fully understood and fully leveraged. How do we better support Maori and Pacific peoples into the high-tech jobs of the future? And with 30% of our population from Asia, how can we use that better? And underneath all of this are 2 million people, many of whom face relative disadvantage for multiple reasons. Education and health services are essential to their progress. Yet the reality is that these are highly unevenly distributed across Auckland. We saw in lockdown how local empowerment made all the difference to decision-making for their communities. So where are the strategic decisions to be made? Compared to other countries, Auckland's local bodies have rather limited authority. Most of the big decisions that impact on Aucklanders' lives are actually made south of the Bombay Hills. Local body politics tend to be dominated by short-term local issues. The largely absent nature of political parties and local body politics limits strategic policy development by elected officials and inhibits citizen engagement. We need to think through how the new tools of participatory democracy might lead to more collective ownership and offer the opportunities we've not yet grabbed. But look ahead 30 years. By 2040, there will likely be constitutional reform at the national level. How will that affect Auckland's governance? Do we continue with low ambition, or do we find ways to make Auckland a city of global significance? This would mean addressing issues left in the too hard basket. How do we make the city more sustainable, protect its rural land, and we have a lot of rural land, value its environment? Should we establish a regional sustainability commission to bring the sustainable development goals to life locally? How do we take 2 million people and ensure their well-being and qualities of life? So what will it mean to be a smart city? The term's used all the time. It's not just about sensors for traffic and air pollution. Will the transport modalities of 2045 be the ones that we are building now? I doubt it. The 1980s infrastructure will not be dominant then. We should be more ambitious now. Urban farming, smart grids, autonomous vehicles, digital services that reach everyone, remote education and health, all of these are part of the mix of a mid-21st century smart city. It means having the capacity for adaptive institutional thinking in a change of rapid change. The technology used by Team New Zealand was but a microcosm of what we can do. Interestingly, most of that technology came from a combination of work from the University of Auckland combined with experts brought in from offshore. Could we learn from that example as an illustration of what could be done at scale? Academic community, international integration, bringing together with our local business community. The cliche that if you don't know where you're going, any road will do seems particularly apposite. Let's have a true dialogue on what Auckland could be. It would require Wellington, Auckland, and importantly, Aucklanders to co-design a realistic future that reflects our diversity of peoples, cultures, and worldviews. If we could get that dialogue moving, then we could genuinely become a globally relevant city in the South Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Peter. You've certainly given us some food for thought around the issues and the challenges that we face in striving to make Auckland meet its potential and how quickly we need to do that. Our next guest is Greg Cross, the co-founder and chief business officer of Soul Machines. Now, prior to teaming up with Dr. Mark Sager to create Soul Machines, Greg was chair of the world's leading wireless power company's Power by Proxy, which was sold to Apple in 2017. And through an early career in multiple technology companies, Greg has made his mark as a business leader in New Zealand and abroad, including a role as entrepreneur in residence in Silicon Valley for an international venture capital firm. Greg was inducted into the New Zealand High Tech Hall of Fame in 2019. Please welcome Greg Cross to the stage.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me. I'm going to start off just by picking up on a few things Peter said. I am responsible for spinning two high-tech companies, two deep-tech companies out of the University of Auckland. They've both been mentioned already, Power by Proxy and now Soul Machines. So deep tech is an important part of the future of any technology industry. At Soul Machines, we're nearly 5 years old. I got to meet Dr. Mark Sager, my co-founder, in a very Kiwi way, a very Auckland way, having a beer at a bar up on the university campus. We spun Soul Machines out of the university in July of 2016, and since then we have grown from a team of 11 researchers that included Mark and myself to a team of over 210, and we call them soulmates. 210 soulmates all around the world. 105 of those soulmates are the core of our research and development hub. They live primarily here in Auckland. I can't say they work out of our office in Auckland anymore because like most of us, we live in a work from anywhere world today. We've managed to attract, over the course of the last 5 years, over $100 million of venture capital investment from the leading AI research VCs on the planet. Horizons Ventures out of Hong Kong, Temasek out of Singapore, Lakestar out of Europe, Salesforce out of Silicon Valley. So we are building a world-class AI research company here in New Zealand. Our R&D is here. We compete. We think of ourselves as competing with Google DeepMind out of London. We're fortunate to have Demise and Mustafa as small investors in our company. We think of ourselves as competing with OpenAI, a leading AI research company in Silicon Valley. So that's how we frame who we are. So we do our R&D here, but we do our business on the international stage. You know, we are, for all intents and purposes, our business is headquartered firmly in Silicon Valley. Over the last 12 months, I have recruited 5 new senior executives for my company, all by Zoom. My Chief Marketing Officer, ex-Salesforce, my new Chief Technology Officer from a company that was acquired by Google a couple of years back, my Head of Global Sales from VMware. We operate and we think and we compete on the global stage as a US, to all intents and purposes, as a US company. I have over 110 people based in, not in offices, in their homes across America today. So that's the context. We have doubled in size in the last 6 months. We have doubled in size in the last 6 months. First 6 months of 2020, obviously very, very quiet, but the world is coming back to life. In 2019, in what I call olden days, in olden days, I used to travel the world. I used to circumnavigate the world continuously. And I used to be speaking at events like this all over the world about the 4th Industrial Revolution. Remember that? The robots are coming. They're going to steal our jobs. They're going to kill us. We're going to... Elon wants us all to move to Mars because he is scared of the robots, but he actually has a company that's building. I think he plans to make money both ways. That was 2019. 2020 arrived, travel stopped. I'm an Aucklander. I've lived in Auckland for the last 20 years, but I have never been in Auckland full time. I celebrate my 20th year wedding anniversary in June of this year. It is the first time my wife has had a full-time husband. We're still planning to celebrate it. The world changed, the world stopped, and we stopped talking about the 4th Industrial Revolution. We stopped talking about the fact that the robots were coming in and the world was going to change, because the world changed in a very, very different way for each and every one of us, and we all went down a couple of levels down Maslow's hierarchy, and we got concerned about a bunch of more important and more real things. But here's the thing, here we are, we've got through 2020, and the world went more digital. We changed the way we bought stuff. New Zealand started to play some catch-up, in the fundamental measures like e-commerce, doing business digitally. We lagged the world going into COVID-19, and we, in some respects, we still lag the world in terms of e-commerce transactions. The fundamental way of doing business in the digital economy. And these are some of the challenges that I just want to touch on in the time that I have today. So over the last 6 months, we have seen enormous digital acceleration. So the 4th Industrial Revolution didn't go away. It didn't stop. It happened when we weren't looking. It started when we weren't looking, and it actually accelerated. So, we're sitting here thinking we're in 2021, but in terms of the digital, the 4th Industrial Revolution, maybe we're sitting in 2024 already. By my guesses, we probably accelerated the rate at which we think about the change to digital technologies and digital platforms. Not digital transformation, too late for digital transformation. It is a digital now world. It will have an impact on every single industry. We got to do amazing work for Nestle in the last 6 months. Big global food ingredients company. What did they want to do? They wanted to create personalized brand communications for the first time. Ruth, their cookie coach, represents their Toll House cookie brand to the world, as an example. Procter & Gamble revolutionized their online e-commerce shopping using Yumi as a brand ambassador and a digital sales representative of their SK2 brand. So, these are some of the things that we are doing and we are thinking about already. Every industry in the world will change, and I just want to touch on a few things that have been raised today. The future of education. It's not about international students moving around the world, it's about education going to international students all over the world. One of my biggest clients is Maryville University, just outside of St. Louis. One of the leading thinkers on the future of college education, Dr. Mark Lombardi, is the president there. He increased his business by 50% last year. He has a campus of 5,000 real students in St. Louis. He had going into COVID a campus of digital students of 10,000. At the end of 2020, he had 15,000 digital students, plus the 5,000 that were receiving their education digitally. I can say, by one measure, he doubled the size of his education business during COVID-19. And these are some of the different ways. That's one industry. Healthcare, we don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough healthcare professionals. The work we've done with the World Health Organization in terms of helping them dispel myths about COVID-19. Florence speaks 6 languages. These are some of the things of our future. Now I can go on and I can talk about every single industry in the world. We're doing work in the digital entertainment industry with digital twins of celebrities, will.i.am, Carmelo Anthony, the NBA superstar. We're doing work with Bollywood. We had a mention earlier on this morning about the entertainment industry and the blurring of lines between the film industry and the game industry. Let me tell you, that blurring of lines is going to continue. We are working today on productions which will put our digital people, powered by artificial intelligence, into movies and into TV series. Is that a movie? Is that traditional media? Is that a game? Or is that just a digital version of real life? So we're going to see blurring of these lines, and we're not going to have the opportunity to stop and think and wait and take our time over these decisions. We are actually going to have to make some decisions about what we want to be good at, how we want to do these things. So, there are areas where, we still, despite some of the doom and gloom that exists, we still have a good education system. We have been lucky with the level of healthcare that we've been able to provide our communities with. We have made some clever thinking, or we have done some clever thinking on issues around, some of the early issues around AI and diversity and ethics. But these are starting points. And these are starting points we are going to have to move on incredibly rapidly if we are going to want to be part of this digital future. My fear, and I'll leave this, and it's my final comment, my fear, we already sit at the bottom of the productivity list, and by most rankings and by most measures. We are entering a decade, this next 10 years, where we could either radically change and make some big decisions about how we want to radically change and prepare ourselves for 2030, or we could fall off the bottom. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what's in front of us at the moment. Thank you very much.